Okay, thank you. Got it. Okay, yeah, thank you. So good afternoon to everyone online and here. My name is Godwin, and I'm happy to join you. Thanks, Adriana and Kate and Rahina for having me, the rest of the team. So I would be presenting on revisiting fire management in Ghana, integrating historical practices, institutional dynamics, and collaborative approaches. And I know a lot of you have quite a big knowledge on fires, so we're just going to zoom down to what we've translated some of your knowledge and your science background into on-ground action. I'll give a little brief of Rocha, Ghana, and what we do, and then some policies that support the fireworks that we are doing in Ghana. And then I'll zoom in onto the landscape context, into the more ecological landscape, and then look at our approach, some impacts, and then key lessons and challenges. So at Rocha, we work with a vision of caring for God's creation, and we also focus on these other thematic areas quite a lot, where we try to put them all in the mix of collaborative natural resource governance, environmental conservation, species management, climate change issues, and more. In Ghana, we work primarily around biodiversity hotspots, so where there's a lot of attention, interest, competing interest, to say. So in the north, we work around the savannah enclave where there is a lot of fire issues ongoing, a lot of heat, harmattan, flood issues sometimes, droughts. And then down south, we work around the high forest areas and then the coastal belts, all to conserve some of the hot biodiversity hotspots there. So zoning in on the landscape, work in the Mole ecological landscape, which is around the biggest protected area in Ghana, which is the Mole National Park. Mole National Park is home to elephants and to buffaloes and to several species. So just like the traditional protected area establishments, a lot of people who were living in the area had to be relocated. And then some of the communities had to lose their hunting grounds, their fishing, their cemeteries and their homes and so on. So they resettled some of the communities around the park. And so we work on the eastern fringe of the park, where we are supporting community natural resource collaboration methods there. And so that is where I'm going to focus my presentation. So historically, government has managed our natural resources through different policies and agencies. And then in 2000, we realized that we needed to include communities in collaboration in natural resource management. So just as I mentioned in my previous presentation on Monday, so that is what gave birth to what we called CREMES in Ghana, which is kind of a hybrid of community-based natural resource management scheme, where communities take charge of their resources and take decisions around those resources for their own good. Because if they are excluded, then there's a lot of friction. But if they feel included in the decisions, then it becomes easier for us to collaborate on the natural resource management. So that is what gave birth to CREMES. So our work with the communities is how do we devolve these authority to the communities for them to feel part of these resources that they own and they know even much more about than ourselves. So developing community-based wildlife management and habitat conservation, that is what has evolved around what we've been doing in the landscape. So coming down to fires, in Ghana, when it comes to forest reserves, natural resources, the responsibility lies with the Forest Service Division of the Forestry Commission to regulate fire-related issues around protected areas. Then when it comes to the bigger fire issues in Ghana, then it sits with the Ghana National Fire Service. So already, sometimes there can be some conflicting issues there, because then one institution is for forest reserves, then another institution is wildfires, bushfires in general. So already there are some issues there, but there are enough policies, regulations that gives these institutions the opportunity to work around fires and to regulate fires in the landscape. So the landscape is kind of fire prone. It's a savannah landscape. So obviously the weather conditions are harsh, very windy conditions around this time, all from November all the way to March, April next year. It's strong winds, it's harmattan, everything is dry. And then already there's limited resources in the landscape. And then everybody is competing for something. And so about 80 to 90% of the things that people do in the landscape is fire related. So whether the person is a farmer, which is 90% of the population, or it's a herdsman, or it's a hunter, whatever group you are working with fire. So fire is kind of in the mix of everything that we are doing in the landscape. And so we virtually do nothing without fire. So we even have a festival that is Fire Festival. So it places also traditionally the importance fire plays in the roles of the community. So we have the Gentingi, which is a fire festival, which is celebrated in the first traditional month. Actually, it rotates. So last year it was in July, and so they celebrate this festival, and then you have people coming out with fires and holding torches, dry grasses and burning and so on. And then it is a landscape where fire is also placed traditionally, where the land priest, so there is someone who is called a land priest who is in charge spiritually of the land, who has to set the first fire to give way for you to also set fire. And if you set without him setting, you are in trouble. And so it puts fire into the mix. And then it has also the impact on agriculture, biodiversity, water issues, and then animals. So how then do you ensure that fire, which is used by people for their livelihoods and their sustenance, also and their traditional beliefs, how do you manage those interests to make sure that there's a balance within the landscape? So we had to find a way to balance, as I said. And so we used an approach, a fire management approach, which centered on the exploring what we call the ROOM, the Restoration Opportunities Assessment methodology. It's a guide that was developed by the World Resources Institute and then IUCN, which helps you if you want to make an intervention in the landscape, a mosaic landscape like this, looking at the opportunities that are there, what to look out for, what people's interests are, how to coin your interventions and actions. So we use this tool, which helps us to analyze the whole fire situation within the landscape, also merging a lot of traditional knowledge and also community-based fire management approaches, and then some early warning fire management technologies in there. So we did some baseline studies, risk assessment, with a lot of GIS and remote sensing, and some stakeholder analysis on how to communicate, awareness, detection, and stuff like that. So we kind of did a lot of scoring, looking at the fire behavior, the fuel, the topography, the slope, the land cover in the area, and then we kind of overlaid them on each other. So this is the land cover. So when you look at the landscape, we rated them from 1 to 4. So within the wetland evergreen, it's low risk, and then when you move up the open vegetation, and then the grassland, which is a high risk area. When you look at the slope, also between 0 and 10, very low risk potentials there, all the way to above 30, very high risk. And then we also looked at the aspects. also there within the western side, the northwest, and so on. So we try to put the landscape into this context also, and also the elevation. Looked at about 500 meters with low risk, and then going up to down to 100 meters. Proximity also, because if it is close to settlements, roads, then it means that a lot of interaction in there. So we put them into all these classes. And then we had an overlay. So you could see that the communities they were really at risk when it comes to fire. So there's high risk. So we had, for this community, which is Kulumbu, we have a 48% risk. Another community, this one, Solepe, is 51%. There's one that is 66. So there's a lot of fuel. There's a lot of interaction in the landscape. So we put all these things together, and then that helped us to design some interventions to be able to manage this risk. Some permission. So we section into three. So the prevention, the pre-suppression, and then the suppression itself, depending on our budgets also and what we could also do within that time. So for the prevention, we looked at education a lot, developed videos and had community meetings, posters, and then we did something we called a fire prevention communication plan, which looked at all the stakeholders in the landscape after their assessment and what their interest is and what kind of message and how do we package that message for that particular stakeholder. So we had every stakeholder listed and what our communication plan to that stakeholder should be. So we had these posters in English and also in the local language. Different posters and different meanings, and that these were circulated in the community. And then we had this, as I said, prevention communication plan, where we had it detailed for every stakeholder that had an interest in fires. And then this is a book. So the kids, we had to do a lot of schools engagement with the young kids from ages of 6 to 15. And so we used arts, illustrations in the book. And then there was a story, the greatest hunter in the village, we talked about, because the hunting is an occupation there. So how someone feels that it's a hunter and the hunting techniques that they use and how it impacts on the community. So we used this and put it in the book and then had it in the schools. And then we did reading tours, exhibitions for the kids to read, and then play out the story for them to, have the story be, really stuck in their mind. So then for law enforcement, we worked on bylaws. We worked on bylaws within the assembly, the district assembly, and then we had fire issues incorporated into the medium-term development plan. Unfortunately, it is not a big thematic area which is set out by our National Development Planning Commission. So the commission gives areas to which you should plan. Fires doesn't have a component, but of course you can fit it under climate change, deforestation, biodiversity. So we make sure that we put them in there. And then we had the local volunteers, as the picture shows there, who volunteered, trained, equipped to help prevent fires, to educate their people, and also to fight fires when it happens. And then we did what we call the fire danger rating. I'm sure most of you are very much familiar with that. And this is a volunteer who was explaining to the whole community what the danger rating is. So when the community sees that rating at this point, what it means to the community. So he's doing that in the local community to be able to make the people understand better what the rating is. We try to set up a very simple early detection system and also to help our ratings. So we have this small weather station to measure the humidity, the rainfall, the wind speed, direction, to help us do the calculation for the FDI. and then we communicate with the volunteers, who then, depending on the rating, would change the index and communicate to the community. We are at a high point now, so no burning, or now you can burn, and so on and so forth. This is something that we started recently to pilot what we call the grass briquette. So grass is in abundance in the landscape, which is being burnt anyway. So in collaboration with one university in Ghana, we are looking at how then do we turn the grass, which will be burnt and wasted, into briquettes as charcoal, which can be used, because the landscape is heavily dependent on charcoal. People are cutting down trees for charcoal and so on. So why don't we transform the grass that will already or anyway be burnt into charcoal? So we've piloted this. We have a center we've built, which is rolling out this gradually. And if it becomes a good thing, we are looking at it as a business because this can be sold on the markets also and used in the processing centers around the factories, the little factories around, as a good energy substitute. So this is something that we are trying as a way of reducing the fuel load in the landscape to regulate the fires. So these are some of the logistics that we provide for the volunteers. They have bicycles that they can run around easily, some spray that they can have water in to control some of the fires, and then construct fire belts and so on. So these are pictures of communities trying to construct fire belts around some of their areas and their farms, and then see them coming together to work on this. We used another strategy, the green belt. So most of you are aware of it, which we try to grow very fast growing species around sensitive areas. So the deep green areas, so we grow acacia, so those species that can grow very fast and also are fire resistant around some sensitive areas, so that they serve as bricks, and then they kind of prevent fires from coming into those sensitive areas. So we used, and then we have the incentives that we provided for the volunteers, renewing their health insurance and providing them with some allowances, because these are voluntary works, for them to be able to be motivated to do the work. So putting all these activities and strategies together, I just want to highlight some few things that we've achieved with this. So we've seen an increased collaboration between the stakeholders, because herdsmen, who we feel are sometimes the main cause of fires in the landscape, because they want to burn early for fresh shoot for their cattle, are normally not included in meetings and discussions. And when Rahina came, she also realized some of these things, because we feel that they are the problem. So why do we invite them? But through these engagements, we've seen a lot of discussions between the marginalized groups and then the main authorities in there. And then now there's a formalized system, and when it comes to fire management, everybody knows what to do, who to speak to when there's an issue, who to communicate with, and clearly how to be able to and prevent fires. And then we've reduced undesirable fires in the landscape. I think Rahina was saying from her research, large fires have reduced in our area. And I will show you that in the next slide. So we did this land use change, and we realized that in 2017, around these areas, you'd see that there were a lot of burnt areas, a lot of fire-related activities over there. And then we've through the interventions and these activities that we've run, so this community has been able to suppress fire for about 5 to 6 years now, and they've been able to manage it well. So we've seen that gradually there is the large fires and are reducing, and now we are rather having those small fires that are in the interest of all the various stakeholders. So this one thing that we've realized. But of course, there have been so many challenges. As I said, most of the activities in the landscape are dependent on fires. So it's everybody using fire for livelihood, for something. So it's difficult to regulate. And then we lack a lot of technology in the landscape. Most of these things that we are using now are as a result of projects coming in to provide some funding, and there's no systematic continuous support in terms of technology and then also funding. I would jump down to the last one, which is more on policy, because we realize that fire is not giving an exclusive look when it comes to our policies in Ghana at the lower level, the medium-term development plan that I spoke about. So fire is not a theme. So you have to find a way of putting it somewhere. So it means that we cannot plan well for fires, and it will be swallowed up somewhere. So it's a challenge that is we need to look at. So some of the lessons and way forward. I think that the last part is a lot of interest here. We want a lot of research into the landscape. In fact, if not for Rahina and maybe one or two people, we don't really have fire-focused research in the landscape, because we needed to be able to improve the decisions that we make in the landscape. And then also we think that we combine some modern day technologies and some models that you've been talking about to see how we can improve the overall fire management in the landscape. And then provide sustainable funding for these work. We are looking at the trust fund that is in the landscape, which has been established to provide long-term financing stream for some of these things in the landscape. Thank you. So these are some of our partners that we've worked with. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Godwin. Excellent talk. So we've got time for some questions, both from online and in the room. So hopefully we can get here. Okay, I see there's a hand up. So Carolina, please unmute yourself and ask a question.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for the talk. Just to introduce quickly myself, I'm Carolina Gallo. I work for the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, specifically on forest restoration, and also on some fire work with the Silva Mediterranean Committee that deals with forestry issues in the Mediterranean region. So just to give you a bit of context, I just have my few questions that maybe we can discuss. I saw in your presentation you had or mentioned risks, and you provided some maps, but the maps said actually fire hazard. So I was wondering if those were just considered as synonyms, hazard and risk, and was wondering what variables you took into account to build those maps. And then also related to the motivation of the volunteers, that I think is very interesting. I also met one colleague from Ghana last year at one fire conference in Portugal, and in the policy side and the policy maybe recommendations, do you think the government has any plan of professionalizing those people to be like more focused on, you know, not just the regular firefighters, but having professionals for fighting wildfires? Yeah, and those were the two main questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I think with the hazards and the risk, yeah, I think maybe I used it synonymously, but those were fire. We looked at them at generally at the risk level, finally at the risk level. So we use the various, I would say, themes. So we are looking at the slope, the kind of risk that they pose when it is a steep slope, or we are looking at the closeness to communities and how all these ones coming together would pose a risk to the area in terms of fire prone, their proneness to fires. The second question, our fire service has tried to transition the fire volunteers into some paramilitary or fire service personnel. So in the past, we've even had some fire volunteers recruited into the mainstream fire service. But now it is not too common as it used to be, because now we have a lot of personnel and there's a lot of pressure on it. But these volunteers are trained by the National Fire Service, and so they provide continuous support to them. And as and when there is an opportunity for them to be mainstreamed into the main service scheme, they are recruited.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions either online or in the room? Kate?
Godwin, I had a question. You mentioned the land or earth priests and their role traditionally in setting a fire that then allows other people to go and set, I assume, the agricultural fires. So how does that relate to your more technical approach of saying, okay, now's a risky time or now's a good time to set fires, depending? You had the little weather station there, which is obviously monitoring humidity and so on. I don't know how many of those you've got, but how does the information that you get from that link to how the earth priests are able to, the information that they draw on to advise their community?
Okay, thank you. We, because it's a tradition, sometimes it's difficult to influence too much, because they base this thing on spirituality and when their time is up. Normally, we try to coerce them to give that sign early, so that it becomes like an early burning situation. We've had instances where traditionally they had to wait, and because the spirits have not given time for them to burn, and by the time it became a late burning stuff. So what we do normally is to try to influence them to do the early burning, and so we communicate with the volunteers and also the traditional authorities to do that kind of engagement at the community level, so that the earth priests will now be able to tell them to do the burning early. Yeah, so that's how we do we liaise with the earth priest there. But because it's about spiritual, we cannot bring too much science in it. They have their own way of communicating with their spirit. So if the time is not up, you can't say, hey, spirit, start. Yeah, I mean, so it's kind of, that's the challenge. So at our workshop, they mentioned that they wanted to form an association, come together, the earth priests of all the communities, so that they can together take informed decisions about when to start the fire. So it was one of the things that we discussed. It was a major outcome from our workshop. Yeah, and that would be a good thing, because they were also not in synergy. So I think everybody's gods were talking at different times. So then if your god is late, there could be fire from somewhere entering. So by the time you even set your fire, the fires is already coming from another community. So they want to also come together to be able to have that synergy in pronouncing when to start fires.
That's really interesting. I also had a question about whether there's any evidence that early burning is better or worse than late burning for, I don't know, they're obviously trying to clear their fields, but from a biodiversity perspective, or from a shea butter perspective, or from other productive aspects of the landscape, is there evidence that one or the other is better?
Well, there are a lot of academics here, so we'll leave them. But practically on the ground, early burning tends to have little impact, because we still have a lot of greenery around. And then also there is the harmattan that sets in with some little bit of moisture. So we have some early shootings coming up. We need to just post this with scientific distance. But on the ground, yes, early burning is better because then the intensity is little. We're able to control it. The winds are not too high at that time. So, and the sun is not too scorchy, so we can have control. But when it is late, you can't. And it's difficult. It bends and bends everything on its way. So from practice, we would say, yes, early burning is better, but we'll need science to help us.
Yeah. I have a question, actually. Oh,
No, far away, man.
okay.
Oh, God.
So you were talking about the uses of fire and why different members of the community might use fire. And you also mentioned there's elephants in the region.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming there's incidences of human-wildlife conflict with the elephants.
Yeah.
So is fire ever used as a tool to reduce that conflict? For example, by removing a food source near the community to reduce that contact with the elephants?
No. Fire has not been used as a way to reduce the conflict, elephant human wildlife conflict. So it actually speeds up because then they use the fire to clear their land. So it means that the elephants would have easy access, of course, to crops. And then they can now also cross within their corridors and go to another landscape. So it's not a target effort to use fires to reduce contact with elephants. We've not done that yet. But from practice, it actually also facilitates elephants moving. In fact, the farmers use fires to attract the wildlife. Yeah, because then the early shoots, antelopes will come in, they would hunt them. And then when it is dry, a lot of animals are now looking for food. So they also use that as a way of getting some of the wildlife into their landscape. Yeah.
Interesting. Oh,
Yeah. Thanks very much. It's really interesting. I mean, so I was sort of going to follow up on what Kate was asking about, what is a good fire? So what's your sense of, before you intervened, what the direction of travel was in terms of fire? Was it getting more out of control? And if so, what were the causes of that lack of control? Was it climate, or was it breakdown of community governance mechanisms? So almost like when you went in, what was the problem you were trying to fix? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I thought you were going to ask our models. So
Oh,
I was trying to avoid that. Okay, yes. So when we went in, it was more uncoordinated. I think it was more uncoordinated. Every interest group was working in silos. So the first thing that we wanted to do was to create that governance where there's a lot of talks around fires, and people don't feel shy to talk about fires. Still, people feel shy to talk about fires because people think that fires is bad, and somebody says, okay, it's good. So we wanted to first of all create that rapport or platform for people to freely speak about fires. And then it was out of hand because we didn't take into consideration a lot of the factors. Climate has impacted a lot of our sector in the past 7-8 years. Rivers that don't flood are now flooding. This year, we've not had rain. We didn't have rain for 2 months during the peak of the rainy season. We didn't have rain for 2 months. So we've seen a lot of climatic issues coming up. And so fires obviously was impacted. So the winds have been very strong and there's no coordination. So it was very uncontrollable. So we come in and said, okay, let's talk about fires. Let's see. We recognize everybody's use of fires, but how then do we create that level platform where your use of fire doesn't negatively impact on me? We've had farmers all year crop being burnt by fires, and they had nothing to eat again. Food security issues, so we have to provide money. Unfortunately, we don't pay compensation for some of these natural loss. So these were the things that we wanted to look at and try to create a balance for everybody to talk about fires and have a way to ensure that your use of fire doesn't negatively impact the next person's use of fire.
Can I ask another?
Yes,
sorry. So that's really interesting. So is it the case that the way people were using fire had stayed the same and the climate had changed? Or had the way people were using fire changed because, so we were talking about with lots of different people at odds with each other in terms of what they want to achieve with fire. Is that how it's always been? Or was that actually a social change that interacted with the climate change?
Yes, social change, because there were some livelihoods that were not in the landscape when I even started working there. But things are changing, like charcoal. I spoke about it. It was not in the landscape until some 10 years ago or 7 years ago. Logging was not in the landscape. So you are logging, then you are producing more biomass on the ground. There are a lot of cuttings on the ground. So then you are increasing the load. So it's a lot of social changes. People's livelihoods have changed a little. And then climate is also changing. So then it intersects somewhere and then becomes uncontrollable. So those social dynamics are also.
Any more questions? Anyone online have any questions? Do pop your hand up, or in the room. Michelle?
I was really curious about the weather station that you installed. So how does it work at the community level? Do you have someone that is looking at the weather stations and using a grading system and saying, oh, this is a day with really high risk, not set fire, or this is a low risk? Or everyone in the community can come, consultate weather data and decide if they want to burn or not?
Yes, okay. So the original plan was to have the weather station in each community, but obviously there is no money, so we could only purchase 2. So what we did was we had to centralize it, and the readings needed to be 6 a.m., 12 noon, 4 p.m. So we needed somebody always available. So we had to put it in our office, and so I had to detail somebody who was always taking those readings. And then we had a community member, because it's in a central place. We have some community members come around and we do the readings calculation every day. So we do the calculation every day and then we communicate. So we communicate at 6 a.m. During the peak season, we communicate at 6 a.m., communicate at 12 noon, communicate at 4 p.m. and to the communities. Fortunately, we are able to get a network to communicate with them, text them. This is the rating for this period. But ideally, the variations are there because we have a community which is far, about 10 kilometers. So it means that the readings might not be too accurate. So we wish we had in every community so that the error of margin would be, yeah. But for now, we had to do with this one. Yeah.
Any further questions? I'm looking online, I can't see any hands up. Rob has to leave early, but has thanked you for a very interesting presentation.
Okay.
So, any other comments or questions from the room?
I guess I would just ask, how is your work? Is it representative of stuff that's going on elsewhere in Ghana, or is that approach quite unusual in Ghana, or is there a general?
Okay, yes or no, because yes and no, because we've seen in recent times a lot of investments in fire, because we have a lot of landscape restoration projects that are springing up. So almost everybody would have a component of fire in it. But we are yet to witness a mass exodus of having a mixed approach. I think the conventional one is the fire volunteers and stuff like that, and the fire belts. Yes, but the ones about using the weather station for the FDI, the index, these are so you don't have every project having the mix of these things. So I think, but gradually, I'm sure most people would start using some of these approaches.
Any final? Street's got a question.
Kind of following on from what just Kate was asking, is there any kind of cross-country collaborations that you do around fire?
Yes, we did one with Burkina, our neighbors at the top, because they are also close. Unfortunately, they are advanced because they have strict rules and laws when it comes to fires, and you can't do a lot of things that we do liberally. So we've done a lot of exchanges. We've sent our community members to that place, and they've looked at it. And sometimes they laugh at them because they think that Burkina is drier than their place, so they feel that they are better off. But then, of course, we have to tell them that they used to be like this in certain areas, and because of some of these practices, they've become kind of open. So yeah, we do quite some exchanges, and not only about in Burkina. We also did an exchange to I was in Namibia the last time, and we spoke about fires. Also, we had some community reps and how they manage fires. We were talking about the situation in the US where there were some exclusion of fires in some areas for so long, and it's altered the whole ecology. And now they are trying to reintroduce fires back into the landscape. So we try to do these exchanges to learn and to share.
Any more questions? Anybody else online? Otherwise, I think we can wrap up. Really interesting talk and conversation. So a big thank you, Godwin, for that today, and obviously for being here. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, everyone who joined online. I'm sorry about the beginning, but hope to see you in one of our future webinars, and do keep an eye out for those for our next Fire and Practice. So thank you for joining, and yeah, enjoy your day, and we will hopefully see you all soon. Thank you. Bye.
The beginning, but they recognize you, right?